Hello, I'm Anawultus, and today I will be showing you a little project I've been working on, and this is my taxonomy of racial discrimination version 2. The difference between versions 1 and 2 is I decided to rename one of the terms. But anyway, let me describe what this is. So this is essentially me trying to categorize different types of racial discrimination. So the way you would go is you would start on the left side and you then pick one of the two. So in this case, there's racial agnosticism, in which case it is actually being colorblind in the sense of literally not knowing that different ethnic groups exist, or being in somehow a complete denial of various ethnic groups existing. That's racial agnosticism. And then there's racial discrimination. And when I say discrimination here, I'm not necessarily referring to that in a negative sense. I'm simply referring to the idea that you can discriminate or discern various ethnic groups. And therefore, racial discrimination here is a discrimination of understanding that various ethnic groups exist. Now, I then decide to divide racial discrimination into two different subgroups. Individualistic discrimination, which is a discrimination where you take someone's ethnicity as an aspect of that person, but you don't consider it to be something that is definitional to that person. Or to be more exact, something that you do not assume causes various things related to that person. You do not see a natural correlation between, let's say, someone's ethnicity and their behavior. Well, not a correlation. I'm actually saying causation. Sorry. Two different things. But anyway, an example of this would be, let's say, people who have their attractiveness, their sense of physical aesthetics as to however people look, may be partial toward or against certain groups, ethnic groups that have a tendency to look certain ways. And this is not necessarily linked to that person's actual membership of the ethnic group, although there is a correlation. It is more linked to the actual features themselves. Or another one would be racial profiling in some cases that is done where for example, the police chooses to increase their presence in areas that are of a certain ethnic majority because of an increase in crime that is correlated with that population, as opposed to, let's say, because they think that those people are inherently more criminal. So those are two different viewpoints. Some people like to blur the lines and say that they're the same, but in the purpose of being fair, I'm going to say that they're actually different, because one viewpoint is collectivizing an ethnic group. The other viewpoint is simply making a correlation between a certain aspect and something else, rather than collectivizing the people as a whole. And therefore, I have decided that this collectivization is, in my opinion, what is definitional of racism. And when I say the ism on there, I literally mean that it is an idea, an ideology that is related to race in some way, in the sense that it specifically considers race as being inherently causative of certain properties. But anyway, now I know that this list is incomplete. I should probably extend it. I've already got something in my mind that I don't have on here that I probably should have on here. But anyway, moving on. In this racism, there's two different kinds of racism that I've put down here. Scientific racism, in which case you look at things and you gather information and you actually say that everybody of a certain group is scientifically has been determined to be in a certain way. And I classify that differently from what I refer to as ideological racism, which I consider to be prejudicial, because scientific racism, in my opinion, when it is done properly, is not prejudicial. And of course, let me just emphasize here that there are many individuals who are claiming to be racists in a scientific way, but actually when you get down to it, the racism is not rooted in science, and the science is in no ways anywhere near conclusive. Now, I understand the idea that when you're looking at things such as the scientific method, there's no such thing as conclusivity, but I'm more referring to the idea that a consensus probably could not be reached by charitable-minded scientists that the specific idea of racial qualities is in some way the most workable model. I don't see that happening, so that's why I say that scientific racism on here, it's on here because I see it as something that is theoretically plausible and something that certain people do indeed claim to have, but I do recognize that most individuals who claim to actually do this do not. But anyway, so in ideological racism or prejudicial racism, I have a number of subgroups here. Now, if you may have noticed, going from top to bottom, I tended to try to organize things in the sense of things that I see as being more racist, although that's probably a matter of debate. So I'm just going to say that these are just the order I put them in, and although I did in some ways attempt to put it in a particular order, it's not necessarily that way. It really is open to interpretation, and I would love to have interpretation on this. So I've got ethnic egalitarianism, and remember, this is not referring to an individualistic idea that individuals of all race shouldn't be judged by their race, as is common, but actually refers to the idea that the races themselves as collectives, because remember, we're looking at a collectivistic and a prejudicial perspective here, that the races as collectives should be equal in society. And this is the type of racism that I think is common among a lot of SJWs, because what this essentially does is it means that in order to achieve this, what you have to do is you need to give privileges to ethnic groups that you consider to be underprivileged, and take away privileges from ethnic groups that you consider to be overprivileged in order to try to equalize this. Now, there's also other ideas such as punishment that come into this as well. But then you also have what I call libertarian ethnic Darwinism. Now, this is a term that I just coined today. When I'm making this video, it's probably the day before it goes out, because I don't think I've actually ever seen this, in the sense that I do believe this to be a theoretical type of racism that I've never seen, but I'm pretty sure there's probably somewhere out there that's racist in this way. So what I mean by libertarian ethnic Darwinism is the idea that these individuals believe that certain ethnic groups are inferior or superior to others, but that they don't actually need to do anything about it, and that they believe that by means of for example, the free market or other forms of freedom, that the ethnic groups will automatically align themselves in a sort of social Darwinistic. Now, I didn't use the word social because it wasn't specific enough to what I'm talking about, because society is not necessarily linked to ethnicity. But anyway, getting back to it, in a Darwinistic sense, so that you see that the various ethnic groups are different in certain ways according to this viewpoint, and that this form of natural selection then occurs, where the differences between the races automatically lead to what in their view would be the superior races to come out on top. And there you go. So next one on there is ethno-nationalism. Now, I did decide to separate this from ethnic supremacism. Maybe I should put ethno-supremacism. Maybe that would be maybe more parallelistic to what's going on. But or maybe I should put ethnic nationalism, since I used ethnic in the other terms anyway. But ethno-nationalism, pretty simply put, is the idea that certain ethnic groups should have their own states, and therefore become nations, or that our nations should have states. Now, there's many different kinds of this, but this is not necessarily linked with supremacism, which is the idea that certain ethnic groups are better than others, because ethno-nationalism is essentially a form of segregation, but on a national or a state international level, where you want where what they want is that the various ethnic groups are separated, and that they each have their own nation states that they can then administer independently. Now, the way that this might overlap with supremacism is if you're looking at ideas of a greater homeland, or expanding the nation, or perhaps the question of what are you going to do about individuals who are not of your ethnic group that live in your nation. That's where some supremacism may come into practice there. But ethno-nationalism, I would say that if you have an idea of ethnic world domination, that falls out of a nationalist into the supremacist perspective. Now there's ethnic supremacism, where which I differentiate from the libertarian ethnic Darwinism by the sense that ethnic supremacists actively try to put forward their supremacy. Now, there's a few different ways that this could happen. There's, of course, establishing a hierarchy of races, or enslaving lesser races as they would see it. There's also ideas of genocide. That's if I were to make subdivisions into the ethnic supremacism group, I would probably put genocide as probably being the most racist on the list. But essentially, another thing that's important to note here is that all of these themselves, all of these different categories, are scalable. In essence, you can be mildly ethnic supremacist, or a mild ethno-nationalist, and there's very mild examples of that, where for example, there's a lot of actually, I don't want to get into that, because I don't want to get too political here by talking about specific groups. So I'm actually not going to get too political, simply because otherwise people are going to accuse me of being a racist, even though I'm just describing things. I'm not saying that I'm actually any one of these groups. Although if I am on a group, I'm going to be on the individualistic point here. Because why? Okay. I recognize that different ethnic groups exist, so I'm not a racial agnostic. Okay. I do not think that any racial group should try to outdo the others, so I'm not a supremacist. I don't think that there's any particular reason that ethnic groups should try to segregate themselves from each other. So I'm not an ethno-nationalist. Um, I also don't see any particular reason to hold to a racial Darwinist ideology. So I'm not a libertarian ethnic Darwinist. I don't think that equality is something that really should be forced beyond giving people freedoms and rights. I don't think that people should be given certain privileges or be deprivileged. I don't think that that's a very healthy way to build a society. Because what happens is that the ethnic egalitarians, they're the ones that then aggravate the ethnic nationalists and the ethnic supremacists, because they're strongly opposed to each other in their viewpoints. The ethno-nationalists, because if, let's say, you're one of the groups that the ethnic egalitarians want to deprivilege, then you're going to want to say, oh no, my race is being oppressed, so I need to separate and have my own land so that they can do whatever they want in their land and they don't oppress me where I live. So that's the ethno-nationalist. That's one ethno-nationalist viewpoint. There's other viewpoints as well. And ethnic supremacists, they just flatly disagree that people of differing ethnic groups should be equal. So there you go. And I'm also not a scientific racist. For example, people show the IQ charts, for example, and say this is the evidence that individuals of certain races are categorically less intelligent or more intelligent. But when I look at that, I say, well, you have to remember that this is all on a curve, and there's probably other factors that play into this besides genetics. And also, I am a strong critic of IQ tests, even though I score well on them. I am a strong critic of IQ tests because I don't think that they really express the full amount of one's intelligence, in the sense that, of course, IQ tests test for certain qualities, and they don't test for other qualities. And I think that intelligence is not largely limited to the certain qualities that IQ tests frequently test for. So I think that there's different types of intelligence, and let me just be very clear. I'm not saying that all people are equally intelligent, because that is silly, because they're obviously not. What I am saying is that there's a big bell curve, and that there's going to be really smart people of ethnicities that are on average less intelligent, and there's going to be really dumb people of ethnicities that are on average more intelligent. So in essence, I don't think that the IQ charts in any way prove anything positive for scientific racism, in the sense that from my individualistic viewpoint, I don't really see any reason to collectivize my racial perspective, because that's what it is. The scientific racism. It is the scientific warrant to collectivize your ethnic analysis. That's essentially what it is. And I don't think that there is a scientific warrant to collectivize my ethnic analysis, and therefore I cannot be a scientific racist. So there you go. Now, let me just talk about some other forms that I may not have put on here. One form I would say is the type of racism that some people have when they first meet someone of another race and they don't comprehend the ethnicity. For example, let's say you've only been around individuals of an ethnic group that look a certain way, and then suddenly someone from a faraway land comes to you who looks completely different, and those individuals would possibly be victims of some form of racism, especially if individuals in the land would not be familiar with the morphological range of human development when it concerns ethnic features. So there you go. And I consider this to be a very low information type of racism, because of course, when I'm talking about scientific racism and other forms of racism, I'm talking about levels of information, where prejudice, prejudice, a prejudgment, is a type of racism where you do not learn about every single aspect involved, and therefore make broad statements that may not be accurate. And I would argue that many times they are not accurate. So there you go. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Tell me what you thought. Which category do you fall under? Do you fall under 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7? I think it's, if you watch this video, I highly doubt that anyone who exists in category 1, unless they're maybe an infant or someone who's never met anyone of a different ethnicity. That's probably the only people who are in category 1. But there you go. And again, individualistic discrimination. When I say discrimination there, I still refer to the idea that you tell differences, but that you're not collectivizing the differences, in the sense that you see someone of a certain ethnicity that has certain ethnic features, and you recognize that that person is of that ethnicity, but you're not actually going to say that that person is behavior is determined by that ethnicity. So there you go. It's a bit of a nature versus nurture debate, as well as an individualistic, collectivistic idea. So anyway, thank you all for watching, and I will be seeing you all next time. And I will toss over and out.